what an interesting first weekend, don't you think?
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Great to have you in. If you're one of the, I don't know, how many people sit in Gillette, Kev? 70 some odd thousand?
Yeah, 68 plus.
Yeah, I'm with you. Those are long days. You know, being a championship fan is a hard thing. Of course, I'm disinterested. I'm watching all the other knuckleheads. But you're going to tell me that the New England Patriots aren't the most, I don't know, accomplished professional sports organization in modern history? Ever. Yeah, I don't know that you can't. I wish this was a sports talk conversation. Perhaps my guest would like in on that a little bit too, but there's just the sport of Washington is just, well, it's just too much. So congratulations to the Pats as they move on. We'll talk more about them, of course, over the next 2 weeks en route to Houston. And the who? Atlanta Falcons?
Who?
Really? All right. Nice to have you. Thanks for joining me. It's been a whirlwind weekend. Not exactly what Donald Trump wanted to draw up. Then again, wouldn't even know how to draw it up. Here's what's happened so far.
President Donald Trump capped his first weekend in office thanking law enforcement officers, including FBI Director James Comey, for their service and swearing in senior White House staffers.
We are going to do some great things over the next 8 years.
The president's first days got off to a rough start. On Saturday, hundreds of thousands of people took part in demonstrations for equality across the nation. In a tweet Sunday, President Trump took aim at those who participated, writing, "Watched protests yesterday, but was under the impression that we just had an election. Why didn't these people vote? Celebs hurt cause badly." About an hour later, he backtracked, saying in part, "Peaceful protests are a hallmark of our democracy." The tweets came just a day after White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer slammed the press for what he called false reporting about the size of the crowd at the inauguration.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period.
On Sunday, White House senior advisor Kellyanne Conway came to Spicer's defense.
You're saying it's a falsehood, and they're giving Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that.
Look, alternative facts are not facts. They're falsehoods.
The president enters the first full week of his presidency hoping to tackle key issues on his legislative agenda, but with only 2 cabinet members in place so far.
So many of your cabinet appointees, Mr. President, are quite different than what you campaigned on and even what your speech was about.
Despite the slow pace, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he's confident the entire cabinet will be confirmed.
PC professor, political science, Joe Cammarano joins me. How are you, my friend? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. An interesting week. I think maybe the 1950s era Yankees and possibly the Celtics might match the dynasty.
It's a great debate.
Yeah,
but no doubt.
Let's get on to what I'm supposed to know something about, although not much these days.
Right. No, don't diminish yourself. My goodness.
I like to be self-effacing.
Yeah, but you know we've talked about the difficulty of being a political scientist. I've never diminished it because without expertise, we don't know how to make a mountain out of a molehill, or vice versa. It's crazy. But
well, I do appreciate that, but I do think some of the stuff we saw in the lead-in is important for us in thinking as citizens again, not just as people with partisan viewpoints, whether or not we can all agree that there are things called facts. And I think it's the obligation of all of us to sort of discern that stuff, so I'm happy to help with that.
Yeah.
But, you know, everybody should discern it on their own, and that's been the problem. They've been going with their emotions.
Well, here's going to be the interesting thing. Look, I mean, for those of you who've been watching this show, and I thank you for doing that, or listening on the radio, you probably know that Professor Cammarano wouldn't have chosen or voted for Donald Trump. I mean, you've never said who you voted for, I don't think, but I don't know if you have. Have you? Did you?
No, I definitely would never vote for Donald Trump, even if we're having for dog catching.
And you know, having said that, and
he's not qualified.
And I'm pretty much on record. Having said that, still we have to find we have to reach for a level of a goal, at least, of objectivity in trying to assess the White House as we go. And I think everybody, even inside the Trump camp, is aflutter over trying to figure out what happened in the last couple of days, especially the denial of how many people, A, came to the inauguration, and then the reaction to the women's marches, which is just, that's a bad, bad stutter step start for the Trumps.
Well, let's try to do what you just suggested we need to do. First, I think there was a tale of two presidents this weekend. There was the planned Donald Trump being sworn in, giving a talk, giving his acceptance speech, going to the CIA, and engaging in executive actions. That's sort of the stuff that was planned, and actually it has been fairly straightforward. I watched his CIA address, and it was actually not bad for the portion that he stayed on script. Then we have the other track, and that is sort of that fundamental character need that he has to be the last word, the definitive word, and to pulverize anybody who disagrees with him. And I think that's where poor Sean Spicer, although, you know, I'm sure he happily did it, had to go up and say things he knew wasn't true. Kellyanne Conway had to invent terminology in order to be able to justify these sorts of things. That's the Trump that refuses to relent and just let people have their say and move on. And so I do think we're seeing very reliable, dependable, predicted actions. We saw some today, that Trump is actually doing what he said he would do in the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, pulling out of that. He's probably going to go back to the Bush and the Reagan era rules on abortion and international family planning funding. So we are seeing the normal following through on these promises that Trump is doing, just like every other president does.
Okay, so let's talk about the inauguration first.
Sure.
I tweeted out that the speech was hyperbolic, that it was, I just thought that it just reeked of you don't know about how this thing works. Mm-hmm. And I'm now convinced, I've always had this kind of weird feeling that maybe Donald Trump has got some special secret capability, power, sense that he's going to be so transformative that any kind of traditional evaluation of him will fall short. Until that speech, when I suddenly realized he does have much more of a king view than he does the President of the United States view and an understanding of the Constitution, because the absolutism, which is the other word I used in the tweet, about things like, in fact, we'll play it for you coming up in a little bit. Forget the fact that it was dark. Mm-hmm. I thought it was inaccurate.
Well, I think that's right. I think the carnage that he sort of spoke about is a perception carnage rather than a reality carnage. That the crime rate has been going down, the violent crime rate has been going down. There have been a few spikes. 2015 was
well. While we're
increase,
on that, I know Ken, we're going to use
carnage
this later.
going on.
Can we see that? Can we see that that little piece of tape on the carnage? In case you haven't seen it, I'm sure you've seen it. Do we have that? Let me know when you have it. I just kind of flipped the director a little bit there, but
that's okay. But again, I think you're right. I think this was a very negative speech. In a lot of ways, he did kind of go into the positive, but it was really a positive that was exclusionary. And the irony of all this is he sounds no different than most of the sort of conservative, nationalistic parties that are emerging around the world. And so it's funny that he's going to bring back to this sort of American exceptionalism, but he's doing it exactly the same way that we see happening all around the world. So he's part of a trend, not the center of it.
Just to remind you on the carnage thing, since we brought it up. Mm-hmm.
This American carnage stops right here and stops right now.
Now look, I mean, as a parent, I remember the days when I said to my kid, hey, you know what? Not that I had a troubled kid. I'm just saying that there's an imperative absolute nature that a parent will have with a child. Maybe a teacher in front of an unruly class will have to say, hey, you know what? This ends right here. Right. But that reflection on, American violence, I don't think there's anybody who argues with the goal, but the kind of almost doggone threat or his thinking that he's got the ability to stop it here and now. My listeners on the radio told me, once again, you've made the mistake of taking him literally.
Right.
Well, at some point, I asked the question, when can we?
Well, I think your listeners have essentially accepted this sort of postmodern view of the world where words don't really have uniform meaning anymore. They have the meaning we want them to. And if somebody's going to throw things out for symbolic purposes, for example, this carnage, probably includes the Black Lives Matter movement and sort of his view on supporting police first and foremost. He probably thinks that the protests that are likely to emerge, not necessarily the one we just had, probably fits into that. The sort of law and order presidency.
I took it as the homicides in Chicago fit into that, and look, who doesn't want to see that end? But I'm trying to figure out, what is the extent of the power of the presidency in his mind? What can he actually do to affect those changes, say the murder rate in a major city? And what does he, what are our expectations about what the president can and should do?
Well, I think that is the essential point, particularly given sort of the priorities of the current Republican majority in Congress. There's going to be less that the government does related to law and order rather than more. Democrats have tended to increase money that would be spent on things like police. Republicans are going to reduce it. And so most of the money anyway sort of comes from state and local government, primarily local government. And so he has very little other than symbolic messaging. And I think that his message is much broader than the Chicago violence, even though that's included.
All right, when we come back, some interesting moves, executive orders and the like today. We'll talk about it coming up. Stay with us.
Going to be cutting taxes massively for both the middle class and for companies. We want to start making our products again. We don't want to bring them in, we want to make them here.
He sees that stuff as his wheelhouse.
Yeah, and that's a natural belief that he comes from the business sector.
TPP today, executive order, withdrawals from it.
Yeah, I mean, anybody paying attention, this is exactly what he's supposed to do. And as a presidency scholar, I'm happy he's doing it because that's what he said he would do, and presidents try to keep their promises.
I know you're not an economist, but your feeling about withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership is?
Well, again, there's irony abound here that I think that doing that is the non-military equivalent of what President Obama did on defense policy, in the sense that we're pulling back from a leadership role. We're saying America first, which means we're not going to sort of broker these deals and we're going to let China or somebody else do it. And that diminishes the dominance of the American sort of view of the world. And so the funny thing about this is, I think it makes complete sense given what he said, but it's also serving to do exactly the opposite of what he thinks he's doing. And part of that comes from his inexperience. He doesn't really know politics. He doesn't know anything about international trade other than individual level. That's micro level. That doesn't help him.
Well, you know, there's always been this feeling that which he's not expert at will be buoyed by the smart people he puts in around him.
It will. It depends on whether these people have any more experience than he does. And there, I mean, international investment banking is a division of the economy, but it's the new economy. It's not manufacturing. And the Worldwide Wrestling Federation is co-president is now the Small Business Administration chair. What does she know about small business manufacturing? And the answer is probably nothing. And so the problem is he really bringing in experts? In some ways, yes. I think he's brought in sort of the defense area. I think Mattis makes a lot of sense. And as I said before, Hillary Clinton may have nominated him. So this is a guy who's sort of a good continuity factor. Right. But that's not true on everything. Education, the education nominee for the Education Department has virtually no knowledge of the vast majority of money that's spent in that department.
She had a rough hearing.
She deserved that rough hearing.
She had a rough
hearing. She stayed to script. And, she clearly has principles, and she'll probably get confirmed because we're in an era where, the party is strong. We have de facto parliamentary government now. And, so you go along with the party no matter what. But, yeah, she had a rough hearing.
So some of this economic stuff dovetails into this America First thing. And there's a lot of folks in this country who feel that they've been left behind by the economy and some legitimate arguments are made, and thus the vote for Donald Trump. At the same time, industry is changing, job performance is changing,
right.
Job training is desperately needed.
Right.
And I wonder, with this tariff idea that he's got now, and the notion that, hey, for instance, if you might have to tag 20-30% on the cost of goods, even vehicles coming into this, what kind of internal economic damage it might do to those very same people who are complaining that they don't feel that they have opportunity. This is a real economic frittata that we're going to end up in.
Sure,
I think.
and you know, corporations have very smart people, get paid a lot of money to figure out how to get around things like tariffs, and so we're likely to see spin-offs. You know, companies that are not technically Ford, for example, so they won't be subject to that tariff because they're a foreign company. So it might actually move more of our financial resources offshore. It might not. I don't know.
We'll see how that goes. But this whole America First thing, it's a funny argument. You don't want to sit here and say, well, we don't want to have America First. Of course we want to take care of ourselves. Of course we want to have a primary role in the world. But I think, after that inauguration speech, I think there's a lot of people nervous about what has been kind of an integrated role that America has had. And not to use the term New World Order, but there's that kind of thing going on across the board that all of a sudden feels like it might be in jeopardy.
Right. America First carries with it a presumption that America will not be a world leader. And I think people who are advocating for that, including President Trump, will come to understand that if we're going to do America First, then that means we're not going to be the coordinator-in-chief in the global economic community quite as much as we have been.
Let's talk about Saturday when we come back. Do we have a gender politics problem now in America? Stay with us. With Professor Cammarano, let's talk about, I don't know, do you think we've got some gender politics going here?
There was some gender dynamic going on here, sure.
All right, well, let's see what happened on Saturday, then we'll talk about it.
The crowds clogging the streets of the nation's capital were so massive, organizers were forced to abandon the route they had originally planned. Bob Bland is one of the 4 national co-chairs of the Women's March on Washington.
Saturday's march was well beyond any of the expectations of any of the founders or any of the organizers could ever have had.
My body, my choice! Women, men, and children, many wearing pink pussycat hats, packed the National Mall where just a day earlier,
I, Donald John Trump,
President Donald Trump was sworn into office. Teacher Maria Christina came from Newark, New Jersey.
The new president is at home right over our shoulder. What's your message to him?
We will come out here and protest and let ourselves be heard. Expect this many, many more times over.
There were enormous crowds in blue bastions like Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. But Americans also showed up by the thousands in red strongholds, including Alaska, Indiana, and Tennessee. Organizers trying to capitalize on the momentum have already launched a campaign encouraging marchers to send postcards to their senators, the first of 10 actions planned for the Trump administration's first 100 days.
A lot of our partner organizations are still very involved and enthusiastic about what's to come.
We won the popular vote! We won the popular vote!
People were so cynical and skeptical of what women can achieve. We proved to the whole world that when women lead, women will be successful.
All right, I'm not sure that I get the whole objective.
Of the marches?
Yes.
I think it sends a very quick message saying, look, guy, we got more votes than you did, and we're not happy with you. And remember, elections are not the end. It's actually the beginning of a process. And so, the First Amendment says the right of the people to peaceably assemble. It says it for a reason, and that is the expectation is we're going to be involved not just once every couple years. And this is part of that. A lot of very unhappy people who felt very comfortable going out, and I think that it keeps the pressure on.
What is it? This is Hillary losing. This is being recorded on the bus, and the
recording on
the
the
groping
bus,
thing. I mean, what is this about?
Well, first of all, it's about the plurality of voters, or at least a segment of that, saying, we understand there's a thing called the Electoral College, but we got 3 million more votes than you did nationally, and you better understand that we're not going away.
Well, so is this we thing Democrats, or primarily women's lashback?
My assumption is that there were very few women who didn't vote for Hillary Clinton who attended any of the scores of rallies around the country. They're there to say, we're going to organize. Because remember, American politics is designed to have hundreds of little decision points along the way that are subject to and determined by pressure. And this is an example of pressure because a member of Congress from Long Island who is a Republican who won by 10,000 votes is going to be paying attention to this. And so it's not just a message to Trump, it's a message to Washington and to the Republican Party saying, 2 years, if you don't listen to us, you may have a problem.
You know, he poo-pooed the recent presidential ratings, popularity, first weekend numbers that came from the network, suggesting they were all part of the fake news syndrome. And I wish he'd stop using that term because it's really confusing a lot of people. Yeah. This March, more or less, would suggest to him that those numbers have legitimacy. Not that we've had this crowd versus reality of numbers.
Yeah, I was going to say, they used that argument during the campaign, and I poo-pooed that. I do think that we're talking anywhere from 1.5 million to 4 million people showed up Saturday somewhere. That's a lot. That's the largest probably in our history. And so I think anybody who knows anything about politics knows that that's a lot of pressure. And those are a lot of votes. And he may not care, but other Republicans in Congress, they care.
This is the assumptive nature about 8 years. I want to be objective about this. I mean, do you remember that kind of language coming from other presidents?
No.
Being so cocky about this. No. Usually it's in the next 4 years we're going to blah 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 blah, and if we're successful, things will take care of themselves, as opposed to this cocky 8-year thing.
And again, I hope your viewers understand that is the foundation of my concern about him and why I would never vote for him for public office, because he has what I see as a quintessentially royalist or authoritarian view of political leadership in a system that presumes that we're going to be governed by the will of the people, and he doesn't like the will of the people. He likes his will, and he wants the people to come along with him. And that's not us. But he's trying to change it, and the world trend is in that direction. Democracy is not a given anymore.
So it's always the 100-day thing. What do we see in the next 30?
I think we see more cabinet appointments being voted up. There may be one symbolic torpedoing or withdrawal. You're going to see some executive orders that continue on the easy promises that he was making. The wall is going to go forward, things like that.
You think the wall's going forward?
The wall, the fence. Remember, half of what he wants to build is already there.
Yeah, and will be reimbursed, by the way. All righty. Good to see you. Thank you.
Good to be here.
Final word when we come back. Alrighty, as the week goes on, we'll reflect on some of the early moves by President Trump, no doubt. Of course, 3 o'clock till 6 on WPRO. It is a fluid environment as we evaluate all that's going on, including State Representative Ray Gallison, who got jammed up today formally. We'll have some things to say about that over the course of the week here as well. And how about those Patriots? Is there any possible chance that they don't win the Super Bowl? Is it too cocky?
Possible chance, but very slim. Very slim.
Although then again, whoever thought that the great Aaron Rodgers would go down in flames like that? Anyway, we'll see. You have a great night. Congratulations, Patriots Nation.